by definition, bleeding per vaginum after 1 year of permanent cessation of menstruation is called postmenopausal bleeding. Bleeding per vaginum after 1 year of permanent cessation of menstruation. That means after 1 year of establishment of menopause is called postmenopausal bleeding. Mostly, I told you already, two-thirds of the cases are benign only. The reason behind only one-third might be malignant. But then again, we have to treat it according to the cause. So postmenopausal bleeding as such, it's not a disease, it's a manifestation which can be of many other diseases. Now the common causes are atrophic endometrium, that is the most important cause. Okay, the most common cause is atrophic endometrium. That means because of menopause, when the estrogen is withdrawn, the endometrium proliferation is not there like in reproductive age group. Okay, so it becomes atrophic and off and on it might shed off. So that is why that is the most common cause. And then we have another cause which is endometrial cancer. Okay, 10% of the postmenopausal bleedings, PMBs, are because of endometrial cancer. Cancer cervix is again another important cause. Then you have endometrial hyperplasia. Endometrial hyperplasia, it's a benign condition. I mean, it's a pre-malignant condition. If endometrial hyperplasia, I don't know you had class or not, but endometrial hyperplasia is like what CIN is to cancer cervix. Okay, so it's a pre-malignant condition of CA endometrium where if the hyperplasia is atypical, there are high chances that it might change into cancer endometrium. And then you have endometrial polyp, which is again another cause for postmenopausal bleeding. And then estrogen intake. If somebody is on, suppose, HRT or something, okay, so and then she withdraws and the endometrium might shed. So that is because of estrogen intake. So these are the common causes. The most common cause is atrophic endometrium. Then you have endometrial cancer, cervical cancer, endometrial hyperplasia, endometrial polyp, and then estrogen intake. Now, when we enumerate the uterine causes, I told you the most common being atrophic endometrium, which happens in menopausal period only, and then you have endometrial hyperplasia, which can again be divided into simple hyperplasia and atypical hyperplasia. Simple hyperplasia, we'll discuss it later on. I mean, it responds to treatment, okay? But endometrial hyperplasia, I mean medical management, but endometrial hyperplasia, which is of atypical histology, those you'll have to take surgical approach as the treatment, I mean hysterectomy. Now, endometrial cancer, we already discussed, endometrial polyp, then estrogen therapy, uterine fibroid, okay? Though uterine fibroid is a cause of bleeding mostly in reproductive age group, but sometimes, yes, in postmenopausal period also, it can manifest as bleeding, okay? Then endometritis, this is also very common, senile endometritis. Here also, there is some sort of infection in the endometrium and it can lead to bleeding. Then you have pyometra. What happens in pyometra? In pyometra, that means pyo means pus and metra means inside the endometrial cavity. Now what happens? It generally happens in cancer cervix. There, because of the growth, okay, in the cancer, in the cervix, sorry. So there will be collection of pus in the endometrial cavity, and that leads to pyometra. Okay, the uterus can enlarge in size. It might go even up to 24-week size, reach up to the umbilicus, the fundal height. So that is pyometra. Then you have sarcoma. Okay, sarcoma, that is again a malignant condition, though it's very rare. So these are the uterine causes of postmenopausal bleeding. Then we have the next cause, which is cervical cause. Now, uterine cause is very important. The cervical cause, it's not that common. Cancer cervix, again chronic cervicitis, cervical polyp. Cervical polyp and uterine prolapse with decubitus ulcers, these are like there'll not be constant bleeding or something. In these two conditions, in polyp and decubitus ulcers, only when there is some contact. Okay, so there'll be erosion and then the patient might bleed. So it will be sort of off and on bleeding. Okay, and it will not be a tremendous and torrential hemorrhage type of a thing. It will be spotting. Next, you have the vaginal cause, which is again not very common, senile vaginitis. Okay, then vaginal cancer, which itself is a rare condition. Then some forgotten pessary ulcer. Many ladies, because of prolapse, they don't go for surgery and they take pessaries. So when the pessaries are forgotten, I mean, they don't even take out and wash, and for years together it remains there, then because of the contact of the pessary with the vaginal wall, it can cause ulcer, and that might in turn lead to bleeding. So that is there. Then you have radiation ulcer. Okay, if the patient has certain malignancy for which she had to take radiation, then it might bleed, cause ulcer. So that is a vaginal cause. Then again you have trauma. So if there's any vaginal trauma, then she might bleed. Now for the vulval causes, again you have vulvovaginitis, vulval cancer, and trauma. Tubo-ovarian cause. Now ovarian malignancy. Okay, ovarian malignancy as such will not cause postmenopausal bleeding. There are certain ovarian malignancies, for example, granulosa cell tumor, which is an estrogen secreting tumor. Okay, which is an estrogen secreting tumor. And in these conditions, we'll see that even if the lady is menopausal, the endometrium will be very much proliferated. And because of the constant estrogen supply from the tumor. Now, when the endometrium is very much proliferated, what happens is it cannot be sustained. I mean, the blood supply is not enough, and then it sheds off. Okay, so postmenopausal bleeding, if you are asked which ovarian malignancy can cause postmenopausal bleeding, it's granulosa cell tumor because it's an estrogen secreting tumor. Next, you have another condition, fallopian tube cancer, which is again very rare, that can also cause. Then you have certain bleeding disorders, blood dyscrasias. Okay, so that can cause bleeding as such. And sometimes what happens, rectal or urinary tract bleeding. Okay, the lady is having some sort of GI pathology, or maybe a pathology which is only confined to the rectum or anus, and because of that she is bleeding, and she is confusing it with vaginal bleeding. And when she comes to the doctor, reports to the doctor, we take it as she's telling like it's because of vaginal bleeding. But when we examine carefully, we might find that there's nothing from the vagina and it's a pure rectal bleeding. Okay, so that needs to be ruled out. Then you have urinary tract bleeding. Similarly, like GI bleeding, you can have bleeding per urethra, and the lady is confusing with per vaginal bleeding. Now, per urethral bleeding can be because of urethral caruncle, which is, yes, common. What happens in urethral caruncle is the urethral mucosa, it prolapses. Okay, the urethral mucosa, it prolapses, and there's bleeding. Okay, and it can be because of any malignancy of the urinary tract also, bladder carcinoma or something. Now, after we know the causes of postmenopausal bleeding, now when a lady comes to us, we have to take a proper history. Now, history includes a bleeding history. We have to ask the lady what is the pattern of bleeding, because we already saw there are many conditions where there can be torrential hemorrhage, whereas there can be certain other conditions where it can be just spotting. So bleeding history is important. Since when she is bleeding, what is the amount of bleeding? So all this you have to ask. Then her menarche, menopause. This is important. I mean, these are not conclusive, but this can help you in arriving at a diagnosis. Now, what happens is menarche, menopause, early menarche, late menopause. Okay, early menarche, late menopause, nulliparity, obesity, diabetes, hypertension. All these are indicators. I mean, they are associated with CA endometrium patients. Okay, early menarche, late menopause, nulliparity, obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. So when all these conditions are there, and of course you'll have the investigations done and everything, and these are also there, then you might think it as a case of C endometrium. Then you'll have to elicit certain other family history like Lynch syndrome and all, hereditary non-polyposis colonic syndrome, where you have the lady will be having some family history of Lynch syndrome where she can have colonic carcinoma, then endometrial carcinoma, breast carcinoma. These are all related. Okay. Then post-coital bleeding. Post-coital bleeding, as we all know, it's mostly associated with some cervical pathology. Okay. If the lady says, yes, doctor, I bleed, but it's not always. It's only when there's a coitus. So post-coital bleeding is there. So mostly it's a symptom of cancer cervix or maybe any other pathology in the cervix. And then you have to elicit history of intake of some hormones. I told you postmenopausal age group, they might resort to hormone replacement therapy, HRT, and off and on it might cause bleeding. Then if the lady is suppose suffering from breast cancer and she is put on tamoxifen, then also there is endometrial hyperplasia and she might have postmenopausal bleeding. Okay. Then bleeding disorder history, of course, you have to take. I hope I'm clear till now. Yes? Am I clear? Any doubt?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So next is examination. In examination findings, we'll have to elicit whether there is pallor or not. Yes, if she is bleeding, then there might be pallor if it is significant enough. Then high BMI, I told you, again it goes in favor of obesity and C endometrium. Hypertension is there or not, again it goes in favor of C endometrium. Then breast examination to exclude any malignant condition in the breast. Abdominal mass, yes, if there's a fibroid, if there's a granulosa cell tumor of the ovary, if there's a sarcoma, okay. So all these uterine conditions and tubovarian masses, you will also be able to palpate abdominal mass, right? Then vulvovaginal examination is important. If there's any trauma, if there's any ulcer, you can get to know. Then you'll of course have to do a per speculum examination, that is mandatory. When you do a per speculum examination, you'll see the vaginal walls, yes, and also the cervix. So if there's any growth in the cervix, if the cervix looks abnormal, unhealthy, you can find out and treat accordingly. Then you have bimanual examination where you use both hands, two fingers of right hand inside the vagina and your left palm over the suprapubic region of the abdomen. So you will do a bimanual examination and that confirms the findings of the abdominal examination where might be you have found some mass or something. Then I told you already, rectal examination is again important. If the reason is somewhere in the rectum for bleeding, then you can exclude that. And of course, if it's a case of CA cervix, whether the rectal mucosa is involved or not, you can find out, right? So these are about the examination findings. Then after you have taken history, done examination, you'll have to do investigation. In investigation, what you'll do? You'll take pap smear, okay? Pap smear will generally be conclusive only if there's a cervical reason behind it, right? And then ultrasound most preferable I mean, we do transvaginal sonography only in case of postmenopausal bleeding. So here basically what we want to see is endometrial thickness, okay? Endometrial thickness. In a postmenopausal lady, we don't expect the endometrial thickness to be more than 4 millimeter, okay? We don't expect it to be more than 4 millimeter. If it is more, then, and she is having postmenopausal bleeding also, then the sensitivity of 95% and specificity of 55% is there for detection of endometrial cancer. Okay, so endometrial thickness more than 4 mm is a red flag sign. Okay, for which after that you need to go for endometrial biopsy, which will be confirmatory for malignancy. Okay, if you do a TBS and you find that the endometrial thickness is more than 4 mm in a lady of postmenopausal bleeding, you'll advise her to go for endometrial biopsy, and that will be conclusive. Okay, and of course, TBS, other than the endometrial thickness, you'll also get to know about the adnexal pathology, or if any fibroid is there, any other mass is there, that also you'll come to know. Now, regarding endometrial biopsy, I told you already, indications are endometrial thickness more than 4 mm. Okay, endometrial thickness, if not visualized properly, then also you need to go for endometrial biopsy because the lady is bleeding. And even if the endometrial thickness, suppose, is not more than 4 mm, but she is having persistent bleeding, then you need to do a biopsy. If the endometrial thickness is more than 3 mm, but there's fluid inside the cavity, then also you need to do a biopsy. Okay, we don't expect fluid in the cavity in a postmenopausal lady. Now, Pipelli biopsy, which is outpatient procedure, okay, outdoor procedure. Here, what we do is an postmenopausal lady with bleeding, if she comes, then in OPD itself, we can go for it. And suppose we are getting ultrasound also, we are doing in OPD, we get a thickness of more than 4 mm. She's a postmenopausal lady, she's bleeding. Then we directly can go ahead with the belly biopsy, which can be done in OPD itself, okay? And it has a very high sensitivity of 99% and a specificity of 88% for C endometrium detection in such groups, okay? So Pipelli biopsy is specific for menopausal ladies. Now, hysteroscopy, this is a picture of hysteroscopy. I hope all of you can see. Yes? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So this is an office hysteroscopy. A hysteroscopy can be both diagnostic and this one. It can be both diagnostic and we can do procedures also with that. So this is a hysteroscope with which we can take, we can diagnose, and in the same sitting we can take biopsy also. Okay, so it is known as office hysteroscopy because it can be done in OPD. Of course, hysteroscopes can be done in OT setup also, where you need to distend the endometrial cavity with NS, normal saline, or there are other media also, distension media. And after you distend, then with the scope you can see the picture in the monitor and you can take a targeted biopsy. Now, what happens when you take an endometrial biopsy just like that? It is a blind procedure. You curate all through and then if you get, it's fine. But what happens in hysteroscopy, what is the advantage? The advantage is it is a targeted biopsy, means you are seeing and doing, okay? If you see the endometrium doesn't look healthy in this part, maybe you can take it from the fundus if it's not looking proper in the fundal area. In the anterior body, it is not looking healthy endometrium, you can take a biopsy from there. Maybe you can see a polyp over there. So all these things might get missed when you do a blind procedure like an endometrial biopsy. But when you do a hysteroscopy, then you are seeing it and then doing it wherever you feel it's required, right? And why it's called office hysteroscopy? This is office hysteroscopy because you can do it in OPD also. Now for the management is there's nothing much in it because according to the cause you'll manage. When it's a case of atrophic vaginitis, okay, the vaginal epithelium has undergone atrophy because of menopause and that is why it is bleeding. Then you can tell the lady to apply some sort of estrogen cream, estrogen pessaries or ring. Of course, estrogen cream is preferable. Okay, again, pessaries and ring might cause injury. Then, if it's a case of endometrial cancer, which you have diagnosed with biopsy, then you'll go for treatment of that, hysterectomy, and if it's an advanced stage, maybe some adjuvant therapy is also required. Okay, chemotherapy, radiotherapy. Then, if it's a case of endometrial hyperplasia, I told you if it's simple hyperplasia, even oral progestogens and Mirena, levonorgestrel intrauterine system. I hope you all know that. What happens in LNG IUS is it looks like copper T only. Yes, but in place of copper, you have levonorgestrel implanted in it. Okay, it has a life of 5 to 7 years, and the beauty of the thing is like you don't have to. The lady might not be compliant. She doesn't need to take the tablets. Like if you are putting her on oral progestogen, she has to take it regularly, daily. She has to remember it. But if it's an LNG IUS, you put it and forget it. Okay, for the next 5 to 7 years, and there'll be constant delivery of progestogen. And another important thing is it will work directly on the endometrium. Okay, so that is very nice about it. And we have seen that simple hyperplasia, endometrial hyperplasia responds well to oral progestogen and LNG IUS, but of course you have to keep her on follow-up because it might change into atypical hyperplasia, where of course the treatment is hysterectomy because the chances of atypical getting into malignancy is very high. Now, if it's a case of endometrial polyp, then you'll have to remove it. Suppose you are doing a hysteroscopy and you saw a polyp over there. In the same setting, you can remove it, okay, and then send it for biopsy. And if it's a cervical polyp, which you can see when you do a per speculum examination in OPD, when the lady comes to you for the first time, there, if you see a polyp, then if it's a small one, we remove it in OPD only with avulsion. But if it's a very big one with thick stalk and all that, where we expect some bleeding, then of course we have to do it in OT. So, this is the end of the class. Thank you, everybody. I hope I am clear. If any query, you can ask.